In a previous lesson, we talked about how different organisms within the same ecological community interact with each other. And one of the examples that we gave was a mutualism, and we also called it a symbiosis. Symbiosis generally is thought as a relationship in which both parties benefit. And today we're going to talk about coral bleaching, because this is a really great example of what happens when a symbiosis breaks down, and we're going to figure out why that symbiosis might break down in nature. Okay, you should have your guided notes out and be ready to jot down some thoughts. Okay, so when we have organisms living in symbiosis, this tends to enhance ecosystem biodiversity. It means they're sharing their resources and skills, and as you see here, this is actually some mycorrhizal fungi. This is a pine seedling. The roots are digging down into the soil. All of this white stuff, all of these white filaments are fungi. These are fungi going through the soil and collecting phosphorus for the root, okay, for the plant. And these the fungi can explore the soil a lot better than these roots can. And so the roots kind of plant themselves down here, and then they wait for the fungi to bring back the phosphorus that they need. And in exchange, the fungi get carbohydrates from the plant. Remember, the plant is going to be making glucose up here, and so they have this nice little exchange going on. This is called a mycorrhizal symbiosis. Okay, this allows for ecosystem stability. Okay, you have a lot of soil stability here because of all of the fungi and the roots that are healthy and growing in the soil. And these organisms living in symbiosis tend to be more resilient to stress. They can bounce back from stress a lot better than if they were living by themselves. There's a lot of analogies here for humans as well, but maybe another time. All right, so we know about environmental stress, right? We've talked about this a few times here. Some changes, really rapid changes in our environment can cause stress on natural organisms or living organisms. One of these stresses is climate change, right? We've learned about that. Salinity, salt concentrations in the ocean or in freshwater ecosystems as well. The presence of a new species, right? This might present some competition with the existing species in that community, or if that the symbiont or one of the partners in the symbiosis is gone, that could be very stressful for the other partner. Essentially, too much change and too little time to adapt is going to constitute environmental stress. So organisms all over the world right now are fairly stressed because a lot of changes are happening in the temperature and in the air quality and soil quality. So yeah, that's a huge issue for us right now. All right, so coral reefs, okay, are a very unique ecosystem. They are rich in biodiversity, as you can see from this small photo. Got lots of different fish and coral and algae and all sorts of biodiversity. And as a rich ecosystem, they offer food and shelter to many different organisms. Okay, coral is actually a mutualism or a symbiosis between coral and zooxanthellae. Okay, zooxanthellae is actually going to be the photosynthetic. That's going to be the primary producer that is photosynthesizing, and the coral is the primary consumer. Okay, so they are the host and the photosynthetic plant, right? The zooxanthellae actually live in the cells of coral. There's a really great biointeractive that hopefully you will take a look at later. Okay, if you look at a map of the world, and with it, these yellow dots are showing where the coral reefs are. This shows, hopefully, let's take a look at it. It says, closely observe the map across the world. What do you notice? hopefully you notice, and if you want to think about it by yourself, go ahead and pause the video. If you're still listening now, you might notice that all of these coral reefs are right around the edge of the continents. Okay, so these are fairly shallow areas. Okay, there's a lot of the ocean area that is not covered by coral reefs. Okay, but in general, they tend to be closer to the surface because they are fueled essentially by those photosynthetic zooxanthellae. Okay, so coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor. However, they are still home to 25% of all marine creatures. Okay, they cover less than 1% of the ocean floor. That's kind of evident from this, right? But they are home to 25%. So a quarter of all marine creatures live in these coral reefs. They're incredibly important habitats for marine creatures. Okay. So coral bleaching, unfortunately, is something that happens in response to stress, particularly the stress caused by water temperature increases. Okay, and this is happening worldwide right now due to climate change. And what happens in coral bleaching is that the zooxanthellae, or the photosynthesizing algae, is evicted. It's kicked out of the coral cells. Okay, and this causes the coral to lose its color because the zooxanthellae is what is making the color. Okay, now coral kicks out the algae because it's stressed. That doesn't necessarily mean that the coral is able to survive better. It's just kind of a panic response of sorts. And as a result, the coral is no longer able to benefit from the glucose that the zooxanthellae would make through photosynthesis. So this ends up making the coral more vulnerable, and basically the coral ends up dying or getting bleached. Okay. So here's a chart of the number of coral bleaching events. Okay, here's back in 2011. Let's see, we've got time on the x-axis, and I guess this would be number of events worldwide. Okay, moderate coral bleaching, so under 30% would be in the blue, and then severe, so over 30% of a reef being bleached would be in the red. So let's just take a look at the red here. Maybe under 5 events in 2011, fewer in 2012, and since then it has been increasing quite a bit. Okay, the moderate coral bleaching as well has increased over time, and if you were to compare this with a chart for the temperatures increasing, you'd probably see a very tight correlation. So this is a very severe issue. There are some scientists doing some really cool studies to see if we can find coral that are a little more resilient, right? A little more tolerant of temperature changes. But again, there's a lot of change that is happening very rapidly, and there's not always enough time for species to adapt. So one more issue that we need to be able to be aware of and conscious about as we move through the semester.